Kaaren, I had the pleasure of hanging out with her last night. She's really, really, really cool and really smart. She has a PhD from Stanford in experimental psychology, and which is why she's done probably a good job at Intuit, convincing them why design is really important and really neat. So she's going to tell you how to hack execs. Give it up for Kaaren.
All right, so I'm here to talk about a common problem that all of us as designers have faced at some point in time, which is how do we help to ensure that our execs are really behind us and supporting us in the right way? How do we strengthen our influence? I've been a design leader for about 15 years, and I've been an executive for about 10. And over that time, I've learned a lot. What learned a lot means is I've had the crap beaten out of myself on several occasions. I've got scars on my back, and I'm going to share some of those scars with you, because each scar is an insight and also some ways that you can get around that problem so that all of you will become more effective in championing design. All right. So there isn't an exec out there, unless they've been living under a rock, that doesn't get that design is important. They know that it is how you increase your margins, it's how you increase your revenue, it's how you increase your user base. But the problem is, because many of these executives are not designers or are not researchers by training, they really don't get design. But they're not going to tell you this because it's embarrassing to admit. So one of the most important jobs that you have is to help these executives to really understand design deep in their souls. So let me tell you a story about how we tried that. Many years ago, there was a very bold designer, very courageous. And he and I were invited to meet with our CEO. We were very excited about this. It was our opportunity to share with him the importance of design, to help get his buy-in for really putting some resources into this and really turning the company that we were at around. So we thought that not only would we bring him some data and some information, but we also wanted him to understand design better. So we looked at some wonderfully designed objects that we could bring with us. And one of those that we chose was the Alessi juicer, right? And many of you probably know about this and may even admire it. It has a point of view, it's reimagined, the typical orange juicer, and the details are finely honed. There is true craftsmanship in this. So we went into his office and we started to speak about design and the importance of it and why it mattered. About 5 minutes in, we shared with him the juicer, and his reaction was immediate. Yeah. Shortest meeting ever. Now when he says, "Get this shit out of my office," I don't know if that was us, but we left along with the juicer. Right? It took us several weeks, maybe even months, before we had the courage to approach him again. Looking back on this in hindsight, it's because where he was very far from an Alessi juicer. That isn't something that he coveted. That isn't something that he thought we should be. He came very much from a process, packaging, a margins business, and that was simply too far afield. There's another design manager that I know, and he at the time was very focused on making sure that the executives that he worked with had the latest information about design. He would sometimes send them blogs or articles, but most often he would really carefully look through various design books to find those that would really be the right ones for the product management leader, the engineering leader, or the general manager to read at the time. So when he gave him these books, they didn't necessarily have the reaction he hoped for. Okay. Two things to note in here. One, his nickname was Eeyore. That's a bad sign. Okay. One of the things that executives look for are you actually bringing energy into the room, or are you sucking it out? Okay. This guy was sucking the energy out, hence the name Eeyore. He didn't last long. The other point here is he brought them another fucking book, right? Is a book a gift? No, only if you like the subject and it's something you care about. Otherwise, it's a burden, right? Something you need to do because someone's going to ask you about it. All right, so how do you explain design? Problem with design is like water, right? Try to describe water. You can't. So at Intuit, what has started to work for us is really having our executives dive right in. Right? They've got to feel it. So we do this in a couple of ways. Rather than bring to them an experience that we find lovely, like the Alessi juicer, we have them share. What is an experience that delighted you? Humans are natural storytellers. Everybody has an experience that has made them feel good, and they like to hear what other people enjoy. As they're telling their story, they're starting to feel the goodness that comes from great design, and others are hearing it from them. We also have them experience bad experiences, not this bad, right? Slightly less bad, because we want them to experience the highs as well as the lows. Just to make sure they're focused on emotion, occasionally we'll have them draw emotional journey maps, right? So that they're able to really focus on how are they feeling when they're running late, or when the freeway's a parking lot, you start to feel worse. When you get home, it feels better. Your kids start to fight, you feel worse. And finally, at the end, when you get your glass of wine or your gin and tonic, your feelings start to rise again, right? If you're not focusing on that motion, it's easy to pass it by. And many of the executives out there have won or gotten into the position they're in because they've been able to go through uncomfortable circumstances. All right. A couple of years ago, we were focusing on mobile and how do we get our executives to really understand mobile and the importance of great mobile design. We literally sent them on a scavenger hunt through Chinatown. They had to go to 4 or 5 different stops. They had to go to a geocache. They had to go to a fortune cookie shop. They had to actually use a Google Translator app or a less good translator app to say, hey, I want a fortune cookie. The guy would give them a fortune cookie. They'd break it open, and there would be some numbers. And those numbers were a clue, an important clue that got them to the next place on the scavenger hunt. Right? They might use a voice mark. If you guys are in San Francisco and you're really bored one day, just use voice mark and listen to all the crazy things people leave out in the air. It's amazing. But in the voice mark that we left, there was another clue. We made this into a game so that those execs that got through the scavenger hunt fastest were the ones who knew where dinner was. And the fine wine was poured early. Right? So not only did they get the delicious wine, they also had the satisfaction of seeing all those who were slower than they were come in. This helped them to start to have a conversation about the importance of mobile, what it could do, and also the good versus the bad experiences. All right. Once execs actually get why design is important at a visceral level, they're going to be much more ready to move on it. But the second thing they're not going to tell you is that they don't actually know what to do. They don't know how to support you. And again, this is not true in all cases, but this is true in probably about 95% of the cases. So your second job is to tell them what they need to do. Again, Arielle talked about this as well, but there's a huge gap between what we want and what we actually do, right? That's true for all of us. And often it's because we don't know the specific parameters of what we need to do and how. Example of this is Design for Delight. Whoops. We launched a Design for Delight initiative back in 2007 at Intuit. Our goal was to get Design for Delight in our DNA. We wanted it so all teams were using deep customer empathy, going broad, many ideas before they narrowed, and rapidly experimenting on a regular basis, right? Day in and day out. After we launched it our first year, absolutely nothing happened. And that's because there's a gap between what people want to do and what they actually do. It wasn't until we created the innovation catalysts, which are coaches to help people get through the gap between knowing and doing, that we managed to get a significant amount of traction. So your job is to give them a job. This is an example of what we tell our execs to do. We tell them that they are the guys in yellow, and their job is to coach the team of those 4 people or 5 people to stay true to their vision and principles. Their other job is to get rid of any barriers that that team faces, and their third job is to keep all those people that want to get their hands in and metal out of the way. Okay? They've got a clear job. They're happy to do what they can to help, and in this way, they're valuable. The third thing to know about execs is that they really, really love measures. They may not tell you this explicitly, but this is how they are rewarded or not. They're uncomfortable typically with ambiguity. Measures make things more concrete, less ambiguous, and much more predictable. So, story here, for about a year, I was focusing on how can we at Intuit start to increase the number of designers that we have relative to our product managers and our engineers. Because if you don't have the right amount of talent, you're never going to get to great. So I'm pretty persistent, but I had conversations for about 9 months to a year, and nothing happened. So after a year, I went out and I started looking at what other companies do that I admire. And when I looked at what these other companies did and the specific ratios they had of product managers to designers, or developers to designers, it turns out that Intuit was out of whack. Once I shared this slide, the momentum that came around we need more designers was amazing. Right? I could have saved myself 9 months of work if I had just gotten this information sooner. Because this is something concrete they could put their hands on, and they would be able to look at and review every 6 months or so, and that's what we're doing. And we've increased our designers about 20% every 6 months as a result. Predictions. This is not a surprise, this pyramid of delight, that there needs to be benefit you care about. It better be easy to use, as Jared said, but ease and benefit are not enough. If you're not actually creating some positive emotions in your customers, you're not delighting them, and they're not telling their friends. That's great. We all know that. We didn't start to get the support and the traction until we had our behavioral economist run a series of rigorous experiments that found that these 3 factors are independent, and together they account for 75% of the variance in Net Promoter, right? Which is a really fancy way of saying that these 3 factors matter, right? All right, so I'm going to make sure we're ending on time. Lessons learned. Create visceral experiences. If there's one thing you take away from today, it's create those experiences so people feel the importance of design in their soul. Because once you get their hearts, they're willing to do what they need to do. Second is make sure you're giving them a job. There's an old saying about like idle hands are the devil's work, right? If you don't tell them what to do to support you, they're going to try to support you in ways that may actually not help. And finally, lean into those numbers. So on my desk, I keep this juicer because it is such an important lesson for me, right? And it reminds me to make sure that as designers, as we're learning about emotion and how to design for that, we're ahead of many of the others in our organization. But if we're too far ahead, we're going to lose them completely. So it's a matter of connecting with them where they are. All right, and that's it.